Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Chicago online worship. I am Christine Harrell, a member of the congregation, and I'm glad to be your worship associate today. We are a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a community of children, youth, and adults, a people of many beliefs and traditions, bound not by the specific list of things we believe, but the values we share, and the mission to grow our souls and heal the world. Whether you are joining us online for the first time, or you've worshiped with us thousands of times, you are welcome here. Whether you believe in God some of the time, all of the time, or none of the time, you are welcome here. No matter how much money is in your pocket, no matter if you have a PhD, a GED, or no degree, you belong here. We are people of many races and beliefs. We are people of many genders and sexual orientations. All of you is sacred. All of you is welcome. You belong here. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, we must distance ourselves physically, but we can stay connected. In addition to weekly worship on our YouTube channel, follow us on our Facebook page for fresh pastoral content during the week. We have several small groups meeting by phone and Zoom video conferencing for both connection and church business. To get involved, check your weekly email blast or email the church office for more information. Contact information is on our website. If the economic hardships of the coronavirus are affecting you, the church is at your side. Our ministers can refer you to resources from the minister's discretionary fund to the members and friends of this congregation. For more information, just contact the church office to be in touch with Reverend Teri or Reverend David. Throughout today's service, you can interact with one another through the comments section. Simply log in to your YouTube account or create a new one to leave comments, reactions, and to share prayer requests. I invite you now to be present to this moment. Let us enter into this service together as the prelude begins.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like thee. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear and raise my fears.
Good morning. Storytelling, sharing that which makes us human, is one of the ways that a community can foster courage, resilience, and hope. I am delighted this morning to be joined in worship by 6 of our own members as they share the gift of their stories. Today, we will light our chalice to their collective wisdom.
You know, when you look at times like this, I mean, gosh, there's stories that will come out of this. Stories are important because they provide a historical backdrop.
The stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we do are the stories that we then live into and enact and make possible.
It reveals the heart of a person, I think. It reveals the spirit and sometimes, even the soul of the person, if you believe in a soul.
You become more whole in mind and body and in every way when you open up and share your story.
Storytelling is personal. For me, there's an intergenerational reverence. There's benefit for the older generation to hear the stories of the young folks, and there are benefits for the young folks to hear stories from the old folks.
And that learning to share instead of the innate need to lead is something we could all benefit from. And I think sharing stories is one of the best ways to do that.
I invite you now to join in the reciting of our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. I invite you now to greet one another warmly in the chat box of friendship.
At this time, please gather the attention of those who are young, in care of the young, and those who wish for a different perspective for the time for all ages. As members of a Unitarian Universalist society, when our children ask questions, we value giving them the information needed for them to formulate their own answers. This is at the core of our 7 principles and therefore essential to our religious education programming. In that spirit, know that this morning what I will share is not easy to hear because it involves racism. Sometimes the fear of getting it wrong when we talk about racism keeps us from talking about it all. Black Mental Wellness, a self-care website aimed at Black individuals, reminds white people speaking on this topic that if they are uncomfortable, think of how much more uncomfortable it must be to experience racism on a daily basis. That said, the pain of talking about racism is simply not mine to own. And instead of playing into that fear, I choose to take this moment to be honest in saying as I speak that I know there are some parts of this that I will get wrong. Everyone has their own stories. There are ways in which I will fail at sharing what needs to be shared with our community, but that won't stop me from doing the best I can with the resources available to me to respond to what's going on, because kids deserve the difficult facts more than beautiful lies. The facts are that traumatic acts of violence happen to members of the Black community every day. But recently, one such event has been in the news quite a lot, and that is the killing of George Floyd. For a UU perspective, I wish to share with you a portion of The Time for All Ages written by Lauren Wythe, the Director of Children, Youth, and Family Ministries at First Universalist Church of Minneapolis. Minneapolis is the city where George Floyd lived. George was a 46-year-old Black man. His friends called him Big Floyd because he was 6.5 feet tall. As a kid, he loved to play football and basketball, and all through his life, George tried to help others by being good and a generous friend and by accepting people just as they were. On Monday, June 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed by a white police officer in South Minneapolis. The police officer was arresting George because he thought that George had used fake money in a store. George was made to lay on the ground, face down in handcuffs. Then the police officer knelt down and put a knee in George's neck. George told the police officer that he couldn't breathe. Some people who were nearby tried to get the police officer to stop hurting him, but the other police officers who were there didn't help. Even worse, they prevented anyone else from helping. The police officer who was pressing his knee into George's neck didn't stop, and George died. Why would the police do this? In our country, so many Black people have been killed by police officers. We're taught that police are supposed to help and protect everyone, but Black people have always been treated unfairly by the police. They're more likely to be accused of things that they didn't do and more likely to be hurt. This is scary because police officers have a lot of power and responsibility. Though we all should be able to count on them to be kind and helpful, many Black people feel worried when they're around. Black leaders in the Minneapolis community are calling for an end to policing. They want the money to be given to Black communities directly, so that people can choose how they want to care for each other. The Black community and those that stand with them demand that the police officers, all 4 who murdered George Floyd, be brought to justice, but many people think that it will take more than that to change things. After hearing that excerpt, it's important to know that what happened to George Floyd is part of a much bigger problem, not only in Minneapolis, but here in Chicago, all over the United States, and even all over the world. It's a problem that's old and a problem that past generations have failed to solve. But as Anastasia Higginbottom said, white supremacy wasn't your idea, and you don't have to defend its ideals. Locally, over the past week or so, people have been gathering in Chicago, just as they have been in Minneapolis. Maybe you've heard voices out your window, or maybe beside you if you were able to join a march with your family. Maybe you've heard things like an increase in sirens, or even occasionally the sounds of breaking glass. It's not up to white people to say how protests should be held. People can make a choice to show up in solidarity for change and to defend the rights of protesters. Most protesters in Chicago have the same demands as those in Minneapolis and around the country. They want George Floyd's individual life to be honored with police accountability and for real change to occur for the rights of Black people. So how can families work for change? Before I go on here, I wish to mention that in giving her blessing to share her portion of the Minneapolis Church's Time for All Ages last week, Lauren implored us that we not shift any of the focus of the story to the needs and perspectives of white people. I am white, and to those ends, rather than rely on my own information in sharing how people can work for change, I sought guidance from the anti-racist leaders presented by Fourth Unitarian of New York City's anti-racist parenting panel. Multiple panelists noted that it's not a Black person's job to tell white people how to fix the problem. So I express nothing but gratitude for those of many races, genders, sexual orientations, and backgrounds that chose to give of their time and to share anyway. Black author, teacher, feminist, and activist Loretta Ross encouraged all parents to start talking to their children about the race early and often, for forbidding conversations about racism and keeping children ignorant doesn't help. Former white supremacist Shannon Martinson advises parents to let kids see you struggle and apologize when you need to. Get comfortable being uncomfortable and allow your children to see that we are all works in progress. If there are things that you should be doing and you recognize that you're not, change. Matthias Kirch asked parents of all children to set an anti-racist example in their homes through what you read, watch, and say. Author Anastasia Higginbottom shared that teaching kindness isn't enough alone. She reminds us to keep in the forefront that racism is insidious and that the stakes in not solving the problem are high. Loretta Ross went on to remind the UU community that there is a danger in thinking that racism happens somewhere else and that someone is in charge of the problem besides you. After all, if you think that UUs know there's a problem and that somehow exempts us, and you think of yourself as the good one, then you are part of the problem. For the work of dismantling institutional racism is a lifelong journey that we have to solve inside of ourselves and by standing in solidarity with those who need to be heard. Overall, there are many questions to which the answers cannot be provided for you. White people have a lot of work to do. So get ready to do some research. Get ready to lift up Black voices, and if you are Black, I hope this is the time that you are able to be heard as others recognize the need to be humble and to listen. Thank you.
We can go jogging.
We can relax in the safety and comfort of our own homes.
We can ask for help after a car crash.
We can have a cell phone.
We can leave a party and get to safety.
We can play loud music.
We can sell CDs.
We can sleep.
We can walk from the corner store.
We can play in the park.
We can shop at Walmart.
We can go to church.
We can walk home with Skittles.
We can hold a hairbrush while leaving our own bachelor party.
We can party on New Year's.
We can get a normal traffic ticket.
We can lawfully carry a weapon.
We can pull over with car problems on a public road.
We can take out our wallet.
We can read a book in our own car.
We can breathe.
Can breathe.
Can breathe.
As the ministers serving the First Unitarian Church of Chicago,
we say with one voice,
we can do all these things because we are white.
We are white.
We are white, and they were not.
We say with one voice.
We say with one voice.
We say again with one voice, Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
I'm a young Black man doing all that I can to stand. Oh, but when I look around and I see what's being done to my kind, every day I'm being hunted as prey. My people don't want no trouble. We've had enough struggle. I just wanna live. God protect me. I just wanna live. I just wanna live.
The young black man sings, God protect me. I just want to live. His lament is our grief. His petition, our call to action. Whatever your understanding of God may be or not be, we know this. It is by our hands, our minds, and our hearts that we make change in our world. It's important to grieve. Grief keeps the heart from turning to stone. It's also important not to stop there. The systems of our society are not broken. They were never right in the first place. For problems so vast and complex as white supremacy and racial injustice, it's easy to feel inadequate, that if we can do anything, it's not enough. But should the pitcher feel guilty for not being the second baseman? Should the player on the sidelines, ready to jump into action, feel guilty for not being in the play? Should the player recovering from injury feel like they have nothing to contribute? We're a team, and we need everyone showing up in the ways they can, and that's the only way to get to home. And so here I am, out in the field, as it were, the fields of ministry, as coachy as I can get, to say this work requires all of us as a team. And every team has different positions and players. Every team keeps some players in reserve on the sidelines, ready to move into action when the others must rest. Every team has supporters who fetch the water and the oranges, and those that tend the field, those that turn on the field lights, lest we play in the dark. Some of us can protest in person. Some can organize clarion calls, texts, and tweets from quarantine. Some can grieve. Some can work to change laws, others to change hearts. Some feed the rest of us. Some work to save lives. Some to save and restore the spirit. We need artists, activists, children, parents, elders. We need people of all physical and mental abilities, all genders, sexual orientations, racial, ethnic, and religious identities, classes, vocations, and occupations. We need those who are resting and healing right now. It will be important to step in when those who are fighting now must rest. May our hearts be open enough to grieve, yet not immobilized by despair. Grant us courage to act in the ways we can, especially when we think we cannot. May our spirits know mending, may our resolve be steeled, and may we know this truth, that we and you are not alone. I invite you now to speak the names of those you wish to be held in the love of this community. And for all those good souls, named and unnamed, remembered and forgotten, we pray. Amen.
This past week has been one of great emotional weight, with thousands gathering in Chicago to protest the death of George Floyd, with the backdrop of the death toll of the pandemic disproportionately affecting people of color. We see how speaking out against injustice is a life or death situation. The work to support Black lives is important work. This is a time that requires action fueled by courage and hope. This is a time for community. I can imagine how everyone would come together at church today if we were all worshiping in person. How the community would gather after the service in Hull Chapel, and we would all sit around those white tables with a cup of coffee in hand. And we'd share our stories. Stories about what is happening in our neighborhoods, stories about protests of the past, and stories that give us hope. The exchange of telling and receiving our stories is an exchange of that which makes us human. In the face of a system which is attempting to stop the humanity of Black and brown people, the richness of our stories combats the idea that anyone is just a statistic. Instead, it lifts up how we all have our own vibrant history that makes us who we are. This is a moment in our history which requires bravery, resilience, and hope. And in the midst of pandemic and protests, these can certainly feel out of reach. There are times where each of us may feel tired or scared or hopeless. But when we share stories with our community, when we share in that holy exchange of what makes us human, that can give us the boost to keep going, even when it's hard. When we hear a story, it can inspire us to action. When we share our own story, it can remind us of what we are capable of. And the exchange of our stories with one another can help keep us going when we need it most. Just as important as how we share our stories is how we listen. We cannot demand to hear someone else's story. What we can do is enter into a spirit of curiosity, being willing to hear those stories and to remember them. And when the story demands it, make a change. Dr. Thomas King, author and professor of Native Studies, wrote this in his book, The Truth About Stories. Don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently if only you had heard this story. You've heard it now. Telling our stories makes us stronger as a community, makes us empowered to act, and gives us hope for a better future. But we also have an obligation to keep those stories close and really, truly hear them. That sacred exchange of stories is what makes our community thrive. If we were together today at that round table with our coffee, we'd all be sharing our stories. So today, in this virtual space, 6 members of our community will share the gifts of their stories with you.
Happened when I worked in many sort of activist type organizations where we were working to put Blacks on decision-making boards, decisions that affect the lives of people in the city. And I decided that I was going to get on boards and be a decision maker as it affected the lives of Black people, African Americans. And since I didn't have a business, I started one. And it was called Proof in Promo. It was a promotional sales service. And today you go in the store and you see people saying, would you like a little cheese? Here, have a glass of wine. And I had already been Miss Polaroid in jewelry stores where I would snap a photo of a client with Polaroid camera when they were new. And I sort of knew how it worked. So I did start a promotional sales service, went to manufacturers and in the city and got accounts and started a business. I was in it for about 3 years. And one winter, a snowstorm came along and all of my little accounts across the city were closed. We weren't able to get in the stores, and that was the end of my business. But that experience of being a business owner and being able to understand systems a little better, I think was starting that business, I think was one of the bravest things I ever did. But maybe it wasn't, because maybe I just did it because I didn't know any better.
When I was demonstrating in Jackson, Mississippi, as a young man, with a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who they also call SNCC, and that was led by then Stokely Carmichael, who has since changed his name to Twame Toure. The demonstration was to protest the killing of an African American girl and young lady. She was she went to college at Jackson State, then Jackson State College, now Jackson State University. The main street that went through Jackson State College was called Lynch Street. How about that? Lynch Street. Anyway, a white man was driving down that street and he hit her in his car and he killed her. And that sparked the protest in Jackson. It was a boiling pot prior to that anyway, and things were starting to spill over. That's what really kicked it off. I think I was 17 at that time. Anyway, I had no idea of the consequences of protesting, especially in Jackson, Mississippi, because I had never done it before. I didn't know what I was doing. I was still in high school, but I wanted to be there and represent. Fortunately, I didn't suffer any consequences. The only thing that happened to me was when the police came and everybody dispersed, I ran through a graveyard to get away, and my foot hit a grave, but I kept inside the grave. That's why I kept going. Yeah.
The first story I would like to share, it has to do with the fact that as a child of about 5, my mother and I were all of a sudden without my father, because my father was killed. He was home on furlough. He was in the Marines, home on furlough, went to Alabama to visit his father. And there we were told that he whistled at a white woman and the sheriff there killed him. That's the only story we ever got. And so the next thing I knew, my mother and I were leaving Mississippi, because by now we were living in Mississippi, not Alabama. And we were on our way to Alabama to my father's funeral. And so that was pretty big stuff to get through. But somehow I managed. And I guess always wondered what it would have been like, how my life would have been different if my father had been with me instead of being killed so early. So I think getting through that experience was like a first sign of bravery, I guess, to be able to get through that.
It's a story about my son when he was 3 years old. And my son is interracial. His father was African American. I'm his mother. And at the time, we were living slightly south of here. And he was going to a nursery school in a community center. And I was teaching on the north side, and I would come home on the train, and I would stop off the train and go to the community center and pick him up from the school, from his nursery school. And we would walk home together. And this one particular day, as we're walking home, he told me, "Mom, one of the kids called me and he said the N-word." And I don't think he'd ever really heard that word before, certainly not in our home. And it's not a word he and I had ever talked about. And so suddenly at age 3, there's my child who someone else is trying to insult. And he tells me this word and he wants to know, what does it mean? Contrasting that story, one day he came home from nursery school and he was very excited. And the director of the nursery school, of the community center, was also happened to be an African American lady. And he came home and he said, Mom, Mrs. Brown loves me."
Late last week, I was catching up with my mom, who's also in New York City. And I was telling her, I was having this conversation with Vinny about like all this bigotry and stuff against Asians. I said, I cannot believe that was happening. And she goes on to tell me that, oh yeah, it's true and it is happening. And as a matter of fact, she's telling me my younger sister, who's really not like that much younger, she's like a year younger than I am, was leaving work. And she works in a neighborhood that's in Brooklyn that's split between Hasidic and Asians. So it's kind of like this weird mixed neighborhood, as many neighborhoods are there. And she walks into a deli as she's coming home. And there's this older woman, not really older, but middle-aged woman, harassing these 2 teenage Asian girls in the deli, like verbally harassing them. And my sister jumped in and encouraged the woman to leave, these 2 Asian girls alone. They're not bothering you. What is your issue? And so on and so forth. And I'm sure, knowing my sister, there was some colorful language used, right? But, I was very proud, not surprised, but proud to hear that she jumped in the moment to tone that down during this time.
Our son, Javi, we've always raised him to be bilingual, and he has always, from a young age, from about age 3, been aware that Spanish isn't something that everybody speaks. And for a while he rejected it, even saying, nobody speaks Spanish but we do, but us, and he clearly figured out that wasn't true after a while. But we kept insisting that we speak Spanish and that he speaks Spanish and that he's Puerto Rican, even knowing that people will discriminate against him for it. And he's experienced that. But now he very bravely says, I'm Puerto Rican, I speak Spanish. And nobody can stop me from doing that. And nobody just should stop anybody from doing anything because of the language they speak or the color of their skin. So
these stories, our collective stories, are what make this church. And the church is so needed right now. We are in a crucial moment. Act in whatever way you can. Protest, write letters to officials, the list goes on. But let the stories you share and the stories you hear inspire you to act. Take their stories, for instance. Jean, Jim, Barbara, Amos, Sarah, and Sophia. Don't say in the years to come that you would have lived your life differently if only you had heard their stories. You've heard them now.
This is my song called The Little Things. Faded sunsets, impromptu picnics, lakefront breezes, balmy nights. Found myself recalling memories of yesterday. Will it ever be the same? City sidewalks in the spring, watching passerbys were shown to their busy lives, sitting idly with a glass of wine. It's a bittersweet and sad goodbye to the little things, the little things. Picture this, a land where we all grow, sweetly basking in our glow. It's the perfect little fantasy we need, just to reaffirm ourselves and lend a helping hand. Love your neighbor and your friend. It's the little things, the little things. Oh, the little things, the little things.
We will now close our worship with a benediction from the members of this community to you, the congregation.
First of all, I miss you. That's the first thing I want to say is I miss you guys.
But as we tell these stories, I think until we hear some of, or not me necessarily, but until white people begin to tell their stories about what it's like to live in a racist society, what it's like. And they have stories to tell.
The younger generation will hear our stories, right? At home, over dinner, between family dinners, Thanksgiving dinners, and things of that nature. Tell accurate stories because they will be retold.
Be about the business of doing church, because church is the people. And when you look at how things are in the world right now, if church, which is the people, not just the leaders, but the people, if church could do some of the things that church is supposed to be doing or says that it's about, then I think we could make a big change in the world.
So we're going to have good and bad, but that's how transformation happens in everything. There's a good and a bad with everything. It's a crucible, and I think we are in a crucible, and we burn off. Like, it's hell to go through a crucible, but you got to burn off a lot of stuff to get to the nugget at the middle, and that's what the crucible is going to do for us. We're going to get there.
My message is to stay strong, stay up. Try to stay positive if you can, or don't even try to stay positive. Let the feelings come. Let them come, and let them go. And stay in touch with each other. Let's stay in touch and reach out and hold each other through this, because it can be it is an emotional weight more than a physical weight for me personally.
And I'm going to tell you what Mary Thunder always told us over and over and over and over. She always said, pray for the people that the people may live. Pray for the people that the people may live.
I am in the cohort with Annalisa and Elise and Avery of pre-service teachers who saw a need for this Sunday night when CPS canceled that food service for our families and caregivers.
On top of them canceling the service, there are no grocery stores. The parents were not given enough time to really compensate for that. So we knew students were going to be going hungry. I was waiting for some response, and I just kept waiting and eventually realized somebody needs to organize it, and made a few phone calls. And because so many people were ready to help and just needed that push, everything just came together.
I was running errands on Monday morning and saw a message from Facebook. I pulled over and responded to Elise's question if the church would help with this emergency food drive and distribution site. How long did it take to make the decision? It took no time to make the decision. Of course, I conferred with our church leaders who were in absolute 100% support. And what else is a sanctuary for but a sanctuary for the community? Within 2 hours, she had organized people to be on site bringing groceries. We had a couple church volunteers who were willing to drop everything and come right over. And then within 5 hours, 43 families had been served with food and supplies, and the volunteers had raised $2,500.
I knew that we were being connectors between people who cared a lot and wanted to do something, and between a really horrific, at that point, situation. It made sense, but it was still just surprising to see the magnitude of the donations that coming in right away, and just the food, the response.
And I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of things right now. A lot of helplessness, a lot of powerlessness. So people have kind of been coming from all over to volunteer and help out.
I showed up on Tuesday full of grief and rage and goodwill and a desire for change.
Emergency food distribution is super important to feed those who are hungry among us, particularly those kids who are dependent upon lunches from our public school system. But we're here to work towards greater racial justice in our society so that we never have to have emergency food distribution for anyone, because we have access for everyone to have their needs met.
Immediate needs need to be met, and hopefully in the process of engaging with meeting those needs, people can begin this transformative experience of understanding it's not just that we need food, it's that people shouldn't have to go to a food bank to pick up food. Why are they having to do that? Why does Northside not have to deal with that?
It seems to me like a very fundamental failure on a systemic level that trickles down to each of us as individuals, that our neighbors cannot get enough to eat.
You know, at first we started with a very simple plan, and then we kind of added on to it bit by bit. And so I think like one of the coolest changes that I'm most excited about is how we've gotten things out to where they need to be.
I was set up at 55th and Cottage Grove for most of this week. And it was really amazing just to see people walking by and like do U-turns in their car and come around and be like, oh my gosh, we're so happy that you are here. All the grocery stores are closed. We need this food. We need these diapers. We need all these things. I'm really hoping that the momentum keeps up, that people keep walking by, they keep sharing what we're doing, that they keep donating.
I was telling the volunteers earlier today, it's a lot of small donations. It's not, you know, a few very large donations. It's 15, 5, 10, 20.
Share on social media, share with your friends, email people, word of mouth. A ton of people have said that they've come in because their neighbor told them, or because their friend at church told them, or because something else, some kind of network. We all are 7 degrees away from somebody who probably needs to be here, or somebody who's got a really big checkbook.
This is a moment for all of us to step up in the 10,000 ways that are going to change and save this world. Sign up for the volunteer form online. Send money to support the big shopping runs that are happening. Share and post this information both to raise the funds and to raise awareness for folks who are in need. all of us together, is the only way forward.
There was a busload of people. The number 4 bus stopped for us. They let everybody off. Everybody grabbed groceries, and they let everybody back on and kept on their route. And that was my favorite part.